I will start my reading practice from the book Effective Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie. Here I am. About this time, I met with an old volume of The Spectator. It was the third. I had never before seen any of them. I bought it, read it over and over, and was much delighted with it. I thought the writing excellent and wished, if possible, to imitate it. With this view, I took some of the papers and making short hints of the sentiment in each sentence, laid them by a few days and then, without looking at the book, tried to complete the papers again by expressing each hinted sentiment at length and as fully as it has been expressed before in any suitable words that should come to hand. Then I compared my spectator with the original, discovered some of my faults and corrected them. But I found a stock of words and a readiness in recollecting and using them which I thought I should have acquired before that time. If I had gone on making verses, since the continual occasion for words of the same import but of different length to suit the measure or of different sounds for the rhyme, would have laid me under a constant necessity of searching for variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind and make me master of it. Therefore, I took some of the tales and turned them back again. I also sometimes jumbled my collections of hints into confusion and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order before I began to form the full sentences and complete the paper. This was to teach me method in the arrangement of thoughts. By comparing my work afterwards with the original, I discovered many faults and amended them. But I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying that in certain particulars of small import, I had been lucky enough to improve the method of the language, and this encouraged me to think I might possibly in time come to be a tolerable English writer, for which I was extremely ambitious. Play solitaire with your notes. You were advised in the last chapter to make notes. Having gotten your various ideas and illustrations down on scraps of paper, play solitaire with them, toss them into series of related piles. These main piles ought to represent approximately the main points of your talk. Subdivide them into smaller lots. Throw out the chaff until there is nothing but number one wheat left. And even some of the wheat will probably have to be put aside and not used. No one, if he works right, is ever able to use but a percentage of the material he gathers. One ought never to cease this process of revision until the speech has been made. Even then, he is very likely to think of points and improvements and refinements that ought to have been made. A good speaker usually finds what he finishes that there have been four versions of his speech: the one that he prepared, the one that he delivered, the one that the newspaper said that he delivered, and the one that he wishes on his way home that he had delivered. Shall I use notes while speaking? Although he was an excellent impromptu speaker, Lincoln, after he reached the White House, never made any address, not even an informal talk to his cabinet, until he had carefully put it all down in writing beforehand. Of course, he was obliged to read his inaugural addresses. The exact phraseology of historical state papers of that character is too important to be left to extemporizing. But back in Illions, Lincoln never used even notes in his speaking. They always tend to tire and confuse the listener, he said. And who of us pray would contradict him? Don't destroy about 50% of your interest in a talk. Don't they prevent or at least render difficult a very precious contact and intimacy that ought to exist between the speaker and the audience? Don't they create an air of artificiality? Don't they restrain an audience from feeling that the speaker has the confidence and reserve power that he or she ought to have? Make notes, I repeat, during the preparation, elaborate ones, profuse ones. You may wish to refer to them when you are practicing your talk alone. You may possibly feel more comfortable if you have them stored away in your pocket when you are facing an audience. But like the hammer and saw and axe in a Pullman coach, they should be emergency tools only for use in the case of a smash up, a total wreck, and threatening death and disaster. If you must use notes, make them extremely brief and write them in large letters on an ample sheet of paper. Then arrive early at the place where you are to speak and hide your notes behind some books on a table. Glance at them when you must, but endeavor to screen your weakness from the audience. However, in spite of all that has been said, there may be times when it is the part of wisdom to use notes. For example, some people during their first few talks are so nervous and self conscious that they are utterly unable to remember their prepared speeches. The result, they shoot off at a tangent. They forget the material they had so carefully rehearsed. They drift off the high road and flounder about in a morasses. Why should not such persons hold a very few condensed notes in their hands during their maiden efforts? A child clutches the furniture when it is first attempting to walk, but it does not continue it very long. Do not memorize verbatim. Don't read and don't attempt to memorize your talk word for word. That consumes times and causes disaster. Yet, in spite of this warning, some people reading these lines will try it. If they do, when they stand up to speak, they will be thinking of what? Of their messages? No, they will be attempting to recall their exact phraseology. They will be thinking backward, not forward, reversing the usual process of human mind. The whole exhibition will be stiff and cold and colorless and inhuman. Do not, I beg of you, waste hours and energy in such futility. When you have an important business interview, do you sit down and memorize verbatim what you are going to say? Do you? Of course not. You reflect until you get your main ideas clearly in mind. You may make a few notes and consult some records. You say to yourself, I shall bring out this point and that. I am going to say that a certain thing ought to be done for these reasons. Then you enumerate the reasons to yourself and illustrate them with concrete cases. Isn't that the way you prepare for a business interview? Why not use the same common sense method in preparing a talk? Grant at Appomattox, when Lee asked Grant to write down the terms of surrender, the leader of the Union forces turned to General Parker, asking for writing material. When I put my pen to paper, Grant records in his memoirs, I did not know the first word I should make use of in writing the terms. I only knew what was in my mind and I wished to express it clearly so there could be no mistaking it. General Grant, you did not need to know the first word. You had ideas, you had convictions, you had something that you very much wanted to say and to say clearly. The result was that your habitual phraseology came tumbling out without conscious effort. The same holds good for any man. If you doubt it, knock a man down. When he gets up, he will discover that he is hardly at a loss to find words to express himself. 2000 years ago, Horace wrote, seek not for words, seek only fact and thought, and crowding in will came the words unsought. After you have your ideas firmly in mind, then rehearse your talk from beginning to end. Do it silently, mentally, as you watch for the tea kettle to boil, or you walk the street as you wait for the elevator. Get off in a room by yourself and go over it aloud, gesturing, saying it with life and energy. Canon Knox Little of Canterbury used to say a preacher never got the real message out of a sermon until he had preached it half a dozen times. Can you hope then to get the real message out of your talk unless you have at least rehearsed it that many times? As you practice, imagine there is a real audience before you. Imagine it so strongly that when there is one, it will seem like the old experience. Why the farmers thought Lincoln awfully lazy. If you practice your talks in this fashion, you will be faithfully following the examples of many famous speakers. Lincoln, in his younger days, often walked a round trip of 30 to 40 miles to hear a famous speaker like Breckinridge. He came home from these scenes so stirred, so determined to be a speaker that he gathered the other hired workers about him in the fields, and mounting a stump, he made speeches and told them stories. His employees grew angry, declaring that this country Cicero was awfully lazy, and his jokes and his oratory were ruining the rest of the workers. Woodrow Wilson learned to speak in a debating society, so did Henry Ward Beecher, so did the mighty Brooke, so did Antoniette Blackwell and Lucy Stone. Study the careers of famous speakers and you will find one fact that is true of them all. They practiced. And the men who make the most rapid progress in this course are those who practiced most. No time for all this. Then do what Joseph Coete used to do. He bought a newspaper of a morning and buried his head in it as he rode to work so no one would bother him. Then, instead of reading the ephemeral scandals and gossip of the day, he thought out and planned his talks. Chauncey M. Depew led a fairly active life as a railroad president and a United States senator. Yet during it all, he made speeches almost every night. I did not let them interfere with my business, he says. They were all prepared after I had arrived home from my office late in the afternoon. We all have several hours a day that we can do with as we please. That was all Darwin had to work with as he had poor health. 3 hours out of 24 wisely used made him famous. 3 hours out of 24 widely used made him famous. 3 hours out of 24. Theodore Roosevelt, when he was in the White House, often had an entire forenoon given over to a series of 5-minute interviews. Yet he kept a book by his side to utilize even the few spare seconds that came between his engagements. If you are very busy and pushed for time, read Arnold Bennett's How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. Rip out 100 pages, put them in your hip pocket, read them during your spare seconds. I got through the book in 2 days in that fashion. I will show you how to save time, how to get more out of that day. You must have relaxation and a change from your regular work. That is what the practicing of your talks ought to be. Play the game of extemporaneous speaking in your own home with your own family. Summary: the art of war, said Napoleon, is a science in which Nothing succeeds which has not been calculated and thought out. That is as true of speaking as shooting. A talk is a voyage, it must be charted. The speaker who starts nowhere usually gets there. No infallible ironclad rules can be given for the arrangement of ideas and the construction of all talks. Each address presents its own particular problems. The speaker should cover a point thoroughly while he is on it and then not refer to it again. As an illustration, see the prize winning addresses on Philadelphia. There should be no darting from one thing to another and then back again as aimlessly as a bat in the twilight. Thank you. That's it for the day.